can I check that the live stream has started? Thank you. I will go to each committee member to confirm that they can hear and be heard. This is a legal requirement for me to do so. So if you could verbally confirm that you are able to hear me, and I will confirm in response that I can hear you. Councillor Paul Andrews.
Afternoon, Chair. Yes, I can hear and see you clearly.
Councillor Kath Hay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can see and hear you clearly.
Councillor Philip Howells.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear you clearly.
Councillor Diana Toynbee.
Yes, good afternoon. I can hear you and see you. Thank you.
And moving on to our Education Committee, Mr. Pratley.
Thank you, Chair. I can both see and hear you.
And we are waiting for Councillor Jones, who was at the pre-meeting, so should be coming into this meeting. There are also a significant number of officers here in attendance today, and I will introduce those as we go along. I would like to welcome everyone to today's virtual meeting. The Council is video and audio streaming this meeting live on the internet and making an official recording. The recording forms part of the public record of the meeting. Please note that it is a legal requirement that every member attending virtual meetings is able to hear and, where practical, see and be heard, and where practical, be seen by the other members in attendance and the public watching. So I ask that you please have your audio switched on and also have your video enabled where possible. For virtual meetings, there are some additional points for members of the committee and officers to be aware of. As part of our meeting etiquette and in line with our normal committee practices, all microphones apart from mine will be placed on mute at the start of the meeting and during the meeting. I will run through the agenda in the customary way. When you wish to speak, please use the hand button against your name in the participants list, which should be on the right of your screens. I will then invite you to speak in order of the hands being raised. Electronic voting will be used at this meeting. You will be asked to use the electronic polls to vote, to confirm the minutes and agree recommendations. When the poll appears on the screen, please select an option and press submit. If the poll does not appear on your screen, please access the poll icon at the foot of your screen in Zoom. If you are unable to vote, please raise your virtual hand. And can I add, because at the previous meeting there was a problem, if you have raised your virtual hand and for some reason I have missed it or it has not shown, please could you raise your actual hand to let me know that you have wanted to speak, but I have not picked it up. Thank you. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Matt, do we have any apologies for absence?
Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Graham Andrews and Mr. Andy James, who is the other education co-optee.
Thank you. Name substitute. Matt, do we have any name substitutes?
No substitutes notified.
Thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest. To receive any declaration of interest by members in respect of items on the agenda, do any members wish to declare any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interests in any of today's agenda items? Could you please do this by raising your virtual hand? I will then ask you to speak to notify the meeting which item you have an interest in and the nature of that interest. No. Item 4 is the minutes. The minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of December 2020 are included in the agenda on pages 5 to 10 for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer, so I will ask committee members to confirm that they agree the minutes by an electronic vote. non-voting attendees will be moved to a breakout room for a few moments. They will be returned to the meeting room when all eligible votes have been cast. Please can non-voting attendees now be moved out of the meeting room and the number of voting members be confirmed.
Sorry, just to say, Chair, that we have now been joined by Councillor Jones. So if you could just check that he can hear us and we're able to hear him.
Councillor Jones, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can confirm I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, we have 7 voting members and the poll should be on their screen now.
Please can you cast your vote either for, against or abstain. Please ensure you press submit after selecting the option for which you are voting.
And Chair, those minutes have been unanimously approved.
Please can the non-voting attendees be brought back into the meeting? Thank you. Item 5 is questions from members of the public.
No questions received.
I'll wait for everybody to come back in. Item 6 is questions from members of the council.
No questions received.
So we move on to item 7, which is the 2020-21 budget setting, and it's to seek the views of the committee on the draft of the budget proposals for the 2021-2022 relating to children and families. And I invite the Chief Finance Officer and the Director of Children and Families to introduce the report and provide the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's Andrew Lovegrove, the Chief Finance Officer. I wasn't proposing to go through the slides slide by slide. It tends not to work that well on these Zoom arrangements on there. Just really to give a bit of a background about how the Council has arrived at its budget proposals and how it fits into the wider budget setting process. So the Council is due to set its budget on the 12th of February, and the draft budget that's before you is available for you to scrutinise and to ask questions before it goes through the next phase to the Cabinet, then on to full Council. What you've got before you today is the recurring revenue and capital budgets. These are the normal activities of the Council. They're not the COVID items. They're dealt with separately, that separate funding. So this is about setting next year's revenue and capital budgets going through. And as as is custom, it's a whole system approach to the pressures of children and families. It's not just the bits that are within your direct remit. There are other bits of the budget that have a direct impact on the service. So as we discussed last year, the Council increased and improved its budget for legal services, and that has a direct impact on the activities of the Directorate and the things within your remit as a committee, but that's dealt with in other parts of the budget. So just to say that it's a whole system-wide approach in terms of the budget setting process. As you'll have seen in the papers, the Council is having to consider savings of just over £11 million in its overall net revenue budget, but this also has a number of pressures that are being driven that are driving some cost pressures coming through the system. You'll see those in the papers. I wasn't proposing to spend much more time on the overall position of the budget, so if I could hand over to Chris Baird, the Director, who will then take you through the proposals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, my name is Chris Baird. I'm the Director for Children and Families, and I will move us through this presentation, colleagues. And its aim is really to set the context for the budget proposals for children and families, and also specifically address the savings that are being proposed as part of that. As Andrew says, there are things going on within the wider Council approach that do support children and families. But if we move the slide on, please, Jackie, just to focus on the county plan and the 3 pillars of that. Within all 3, children and families sit, but specifically we as a council have some direct aims for children and families. If you move that on, please. And they're ensuring all children are healthy, safe and inspired to achieve, ensuring that children in care and moving on from care, well supported to make good life choices and invest in education and the skills needed by employees. Those are specific areas for our county plan. For children and families, if we move on again, please. As a whole council, I believe we have high ambitions for children in Herefordshire and the services that work with them. Children and families covers a wide range of activity, including working with colleagues in the education sector, early years, post-16, adult learning. But we're particularly focusing on, in this arena, around transforming our children and family services, particularly safeguarding and early help. And children and young people scrutiny has played a really key role in our improvement approach over the last few years, and I think is well cited on some of the activity that we've been doing, particularly regarding safeguarding and early help. We do have a transformation programme that's in place that is driving and coordinating the activity, which does need a long-term commitment. It is about sustaining cultural and practice change, and that means changing how children and families are supported and enabled to achieve change themselves. We've got programme and project management around our transformation programme, and it's picking up specific areas, building on the work that's already been taking place. And we've done a lot of work last year around signs of safety. That's going to continue for the next couple of years. Early help, edge of care started in 2020. We also have talked about the domestic abuse hub, changes in MASH overall, and those build on the investment that's taken place over the past couple of years. Andrew mentioned the investment in legal services, which has really supported our work around courts and shown real benefit about that. We are recruiting social workers. We still struggle with experienced social workers, but there's been a lot of attention to recruitment and retention of social workers and of managers, of creating the right conditions for good social work to succeed, and that is important in terms of quality of practice. There are things around improving family support and the access to family support, locating family support earlier in the social work processes at times, improving business support to take tasks off social workers, and that's been something we've been doing for a couple of years now, using technology, and we continue to look at ways to improve that, including implementing signs of safety and the changes on Mosaic, which take place this month, actually later this month and onwards, all to support high quality, consistent practice, and that's a fundamental area of focus. If we move on, thank you. And that's so that our practice changes and we achieve what we all want for children and families, keeping them within their families where it's safe to do so. I think working with families, there's not a rank order to these things, but that's been an important approach for us and will continue to be about the working with rather than doing to. And that's encompassed in signs of safety. And really supporting families, not solely through social care intervention, but quite clear about our early help offer and what that means with partners and colleagues who took part in the launch of the Thresholds Right Help, Right Time last year through the Safeguarding Partnership. That's another aspect of supporting that work with families at the right time to intervene at the lowest level where we can, and to enable that change to happen. So as far as possible, there isn't a requirement for high threshold services. However, where we need to take action to protect children, we will do so, and that will continue to be the case. We do have an initiative to reduce our numbers of children who are looked after, but that doesn't mean to say that we won't still have children who become looked after and are cared for by the council, and that's absolutely right that they are. So that is part of this overall practice aim and approach. If we could move on, thank you. So I've put in the slides and also in the report things that have happened so far, the kind of so what of all of that. We are seeing some good signs of improvement and change for children and families, and also particularly from 2018, we do have lower caseloads, increasing evidence of supervision and quality supervision, more permanent staff across the whole range, and where we have areas to improve on, we are picking those up, and that's true in terms of quality assurance and audit, which we've also strengthened over the past year. We've had some feedback. We're continually getting external feedback and looking for open support and challenge. That's a real important part of our approach. So we have a partner in practice from Essex who we arranged and have been working with over 18 months now, really. And most recently they came in 2020, and we had some really useful learning and also positive feedback. And I think one of the important bits of feedback was the positive response from staff about working in Herefordshire and feeling supported and feeling enabled in their work, and that's very different from 2018. I think that's really a really important change and bedrock, and we'll continue to look for external support and reflection as part of our overall improvement work. But yeah, we're seeing evidence of families receiving support earlier and at the right time, and some early feedback around the early help hub that we've put in place in September, the echo service that was live towards the middle of last year, is things that we want to continue, and some of the things that we've reflected in the proposals that we're bringing through to you today to scrutinise and add comment on. If we can move on, please. This is a pictorial representation of the services and service changes, and I think at a further scrutiny session, if we can bring some further diagrams about some of this, it will aid the understanding. But you'll see community and where children and families are on the left hand side, and the range of services that get involved if there's an additional requirement, really, if I use that terminology, around early help, which is provided by a whole range of partners, including schools, voluntary sector, communities themselves, and that's where Talk Community plays a big part, although obviously children and families who require more specialist support would still benefit from Talk Community and that early help approach as well, or that preventative measure. The diagram in the middle illustrates the multi-agency safeguarding hub and the fairly recently created early help hub, and there's also the domestic abuse hub that now cases move directly to rather than having to go through the MASH, and that's an important change which is showing benefit in terms of enabling the MASH to spend more time on the cases that quite rightly they should be focusing on, whilst also providing a preventative response, advice, signposting, and all those other things that an early help hub can do. And then on the right hand side is where our children's social care is involved and holds cases, but we also have things like the Edge of Care service, which we've talked to scrutiny about, which is about preventing children becoming looked after and also aiding reunification. And some of the other activities that we have for children and young people in care, and some of the things we've put about stepping down, about moving from residential to fostering, take place in the right hand side of this diagram, really. Okay. Thank you. If you move on. In the report, I've indicated the context within which we're operating in and within which the saving proposals are proposed do take place. Colleagues will know that the children's and families, particularly the placements budget, is a demand-led budget. It's something that year on year the council sets a budget for us, and we aim to work to it. Where we don't, that's treated as a corporate pressure to meet, and that's true. It's been true in the past, and it's certainly true under the COVID-19 and the pandemic, and that's the approach that we're taking going into next year as well. The recent County Councils Network survey in 2020, 9 out of 10 councils predicted an overspend on the children's social care budget, and that's an indication of the pressures and the nature of this budget, where we do have to meet individual child needs. What we are doing is putting in place a range of services and activity to ameliorate some of those pressures and to address them. And I think things like the echo service show good signs of that. We do rely on agency social workers. We value their contribution, but we do continue to want to increase the number of permanent staff. That aids practice and continuity for children. It also aids continuity of practice from a professional point of view, if I use that phrase. And we've done some further work about recruitment and retention and the measures around that. And having a practice model signs of safety helps with that too. That's something that social workers really value. There is issues around placement choice and price. Nationally, there's reporting of an increase in demand and a reduction in choice. And for those that read the Children's Commissioner's report from November last year, that specifically highlighted that. And we have a dedicated placement teams that really does try and source a choice of placements, but that sometimes doesn't result in any more than one placement for children. So things like prevention, diversion, early help and educate will help with that, but that is also a national issue that we're part of. And part of that is a shortage of foster care placements nationally. We've talked through the foster care annual report about the situation in Herefordshire, and one of our aims is to increase the recruitment of our own foster carers, and that will be aided by the decisions that were taken last month around fees and council tax exemption. But we've got some specifically activity around that, and if we do achieve that, we should achieve some savings. That's true also of the investment in Widemarsh Street and forthcoming Bath Street. It's providing more local supported accommodation, which is great. It enables children and young people to stay in Herefordshire rather than having to go out of county. That again should provide cost avoidance and savings. So it's right for those children and young people, and should provide some savings for the council as well. I've put some more general pressures as well for us just to be aware of, particularly around special educational needs and disabilities, and scrutiny committee members will be well aware of that. The increase in the education, health and care plans, the pressure on specialist provision, and the national picture of the high needs block. That is funded through the dedicated schools grant, but it is something that we are responsible for as a council overall. Opportunities for young people in education, training and employment. I know this week we did reflect on the relative improvements in that for our care leavers, but it is an issue where for young people in Herefordshire overall, it's an area of focus, and I think the pandemic will be challenging around that. We're already seeing that. And so that may result in further pressures for service. We found locally that there was an increase in free school meals, 25% between the 2 Octobers. And that's due to, it seems, the recession in association with the pandemic. So in previous recessions, there has been a kind of lag and then an increase in demand for early help and safeguarding services. And that's something that's being talked about nationally. Hard to predict, but it's something that we may well experience locally. A lot of attention about emotional well-being and mental health of children and young people, not solely in relation to missing education and missing their peers, but also the effects of lockdown. And what I also wanted to just make reference to is the pressures around contextual safeguarding, or safeguarding issues for children and young people outside of the immediate home. And some of that has been referenced nationally, hasn't it, more recently, about online abuse, county lines. And we've done work locally. We've got our own child exploitation resource and team now, and that again is an area where we've had to change and shift and may need to think about further as we see the effects of the pandemic. Okay, so that's the kind of context and the way we're operating within. The proposed savings are listed there, and there's a explicit kind of slide-by-slide pack in your papers that sets out what each of them are. So they are stretch targets. And by that I mean it's not the activity that we're saying is the issue. Most of those activities are centered ultimately on what's right for individual children, and so there's a lot of detailed work that needs to be done on a case-by-case basis, and that can affect the amount of savings and cost avoidance that we actually achieve. As a council, as a cabinet, and as officers, we're putting forward the stretch targets, and that they are things that we are aiming for. But this is an opportunity for scrutiny to talk through what I've put in the report, and also question us about the different savings lines that we've put. But these are really part of our overall, I think, culture and transformation approach for children and families in Herefordshire. They align with what we're aiming to achieve for the children and families themselves, but also they clearly have a financial benefit as well. Okay, Chair, so I hope that's helpful, and colleagues within the Directorate are here as well to answer any questions that councillors may have.
Thank you, Chris. Before I move on to members of the committee, I'd just like to make a few comments. Firstly, may I say that I am delighted that over the past 2 years, we have seen a significant improvement in much of the Children's Directorate. And I would wish to place on record my thanks to the whole Directorate for the enormous effort they've put in, which has enabled our children's services in many areas to be outperforming our statistical neighbours. This, I believe, is down to stronger leadership from officers and a real culture change in the way the service is run, whilst recognising that we still have a lot more to do. I also welcome, and why wouldn't I, the extra money allocated to the base budget, which I think recognises the challenges that lie ahead for children's services, and that the new foundations that have been laid over the past couple of years would have been severely jeopardised if the base budget had not been increased. And I also wish to thank all of the staff who've been required to work over the past 10 months in a way that they would never have dreamt of, and yet have, in the main, continued to improve their service area. I think for me, a budget, yes, it needs to be, it needs to have targets which are stretched, but it needs to be realistic. We can all put items into a budget for savings, which will balance our books. But if we put items in which are unachievable, and we know them to be unachievable, that isn't very helpful to either Children's Directorate or the council as a whole. There are several things in here which I think are achievable. We have done a lot of work on supported accommodation for our young people. I think we've got more to do, but we have done a lot of work, and I will talk about that later when other members have had a chance to speak. But I have to say, I have significant concerns about a stretched target with the recruitment of foster carers, particularly in years 1 and 2, when the additional resources that we have given to foster carers have only been in place about 3 weeks, and we have no evidence yet to support whether that will increase our foster carer numbers or not. We have a situation where my belief is that the 30 per year is does not take into account the natural wastage of foster carers who retire due to becoming older or their circumstances change. And in 2019-2020, we had 13 resignations or retirements, and I'm assuming that is about average. So if this 30 doesn't include them, then in order to achieve an increase of 30, we are looking at having to recruit 43 plus. And I think also there is the fact that there is, over the years, if you look at 2018, 2019, we recruited more foster carers in 2018-19 than we did in 2019-20. That was before COVID. we've been advised by Jill Cox that as a result of COVID, a number of foster carers who were older took the decision that they couldn't continue during this time due to the COVID situation. And although they're on the horizon, there are signs that things will change. Some of these foster carers will not be 80 plus or 70 plus, they will be 50 plus and 60 plus. So they will be well down the line of getting a COVID injection, vaccination. So I am concerned that what we've got with regards to foster carers, and I don't doubt that probably in years 3, 4 and 5, we could achieve this with marketing and other things. But I don't think we can achieve it in this coming financial year or the next. So my view is that it's not a stretch, it is a stretch target, but it is so stretched that it will snap. And the outcome of that is that it has an impact upon likely to have an impact upon the 23 young people who are in residential care, who we have identified as being in a position to perhaps be part of the step down. Because if we don't recruit the foster carers, then we can't step those young people down. And in the report, there's nothing to tell me how many children we're likely to want to step down in order to achieve that saving. Are we going to go for the ones that cost us the most? Are we going to go for the ones that it's the easiest to do? And in fact, are some of those that we're looking to step down going to bring with them emotional or physical issues that require us to spend extra money supporting foster carers in order to take those young people on? So there are things in the report that I can support, and I can absolutely see that you have got evidence to show that work that you are already doing has made a big impact upon the service and probably almost certainly will deliver the savings that you are putting forward. But with regards to the foster carers and the step down, I just don't believe that at this time for this financial year or the next that they are achievable. And so it puts, for me, it puts me in a really difficult position because it's quite a significant part of this budget, and I just don't think it's achievable. And if it isn't achievable, in a way, it's so difficult to put it in when if children's services don't achieve it, are they going to have to find the savings from elsewhere, or are we going to have another overspend on children's services? And officers will be told, you haven't made these savings. What are you going to do about it, etc. So is the money going to come from somewhere else? So I'm opening up to everybody else in the committee, but that's my personal view. Thank you. Right, committee members. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. So I would just quickly echo a lot of the comments that you've just made, particularly from the context of this children's scrutiny group, the pleasure that you can see the increase in the base budget, the progress that we've seen in children's services. But I would also echo the need for realistic stretch targets. And in a sense, that's the point I want to make, that it's very difficult for us to assess the impact of this decision when it's a little bit out of context. When I've normally seen a budget and approved the budget, we can see all of the numbers that it refers to. So, for example, I don't know in the supported accommodation for care leavers what the overall number is that we're taking £320,000 off. I also can't see the rationale behind why we've arrived at £320,000 as the number that we're going to save. So it's quite useful to have that information. But also in considering the overall budget, it would be quite useful, I'd like to see certainly, the difference between the internal costs, so that may be the management costs, administration, commissioning costs, versus the frontline delivery, contractual costs, and being able to see all of those numbers in its full context would be much better for us in assessing the overall impact. That's the point I wanted to make. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, I've listened to that with interest, and I think certainly there are lots of things to be positive about in terms of the early intervention programmes, and obviously how they're already making some sort of difference. But I'm still very minded of the fact, like you've said yourself, Chair, that it's still very early days with a lot of these things, and I hope that it will all move in the right direction in terms of seeing that obviously those interventions are making a difference down the line. Now, in terms of, I mean, I'm looking at the area where the proposed savings of preventing children becoming looked after, which is obviously supposed to be a result of early intervention. But one large part of that, and obviously COVID can't be ignored in all this, is that because of the COVID knock-on effect, that there will be a lot of children and families who are in crisis, and the mental health impact of that is going to be quite severe. So I can't see that there's going to be a huge sudden reduction in the number of children needing to be looked after. In fact, there could be a possibility of more children coming online further down the track who are obviously in a situation where there's been family breakdown because of the difficulties we've experienced. So again, I've got issues with, you know, that being so in isolation of the issues that obviously, and the pressures that we are experiencing. So I'd really like to know what has been done in terms of thinking about the quite large knock-on effects of COVID and the mental health issues that obviously again will need funding to support.
Any other members? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to echo those sentiments. My question is about supported accommodation. I cannot see where that's, which asset budget that is coming out from, or can we have some explanation where that is come from this previous year, and the likely event of purchasing more accommodation? Thank you.
Councillor Toynbee.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, but maybe we could get responses from the ones that we just had instead of piling them all up.
If that's okay, Chair, yeah, that would help us. I think
Yeah.
from an officer perspective,
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah,
So if you can
and
start
I'll.
with the foster carers and the step down, and move
Yeah,
on.
so I think I've got some queries about the foster care recruitment and the stretch nature of the target and whether that's realistic over this year and next. A step down from residential and whether that's impacted by the foster care recruitment. Supported accommodation and some more information of where those figures come from, and a bit about where the budgets are, including purchasing accommodation, I think from Councillor Jones, and then mental health and potential for that to increase our number of looked after children, and I think a bit about what support is there, I think, from Councillor Hay. Is that all right in terms of, those are the areas I think so far. In terms of the foster care recruitment, I'll ask Liz to talk a bit about that. You're right, I think in the foster care report we recruited 19 and then 13. I think that's where the figures have come from, Councillor Gandy. And yeah, our aim is to increase that number. As you'll remember, I think maybe from the foster care report, the number of nights is also important alongside the actual number of carers, and the number of nights offered has increased even though the number of carers has stayed broadly similar over the past year. So it is a stretch target. We are also looking to put in place some more support and activity around active recruitment. And we did talk, didn't we, about turning those initial inquiries into substantive recruitment, foster carers. But we have looked at the modelling, but it is something that is at risk, and there are various factors involved. We have heard some people saying they're looking to become foster carers, whereas previously they weren't. As Councillor Gandhi said, there are some that have been affected by COVID, and as Jill Cox said previously, that's affected their offer. In terms of stepping down from residential, and then I'll hand over to Liz to make any further points on the fostering, if that's okay. In terms of the residential, we've identified over 20 children who we think could be supported in foster care or family-based settings that are currently in residential. And the challenge for us is to work through those cases, and that's being done now on an individual basis to see how we can enable them to be well matched and supported in a family-based setting. And that is detailed individual work. But we've put a target for 5. That could include the use of independent foster care as well as our own. So that's how we've addressed that. We have enabled the HIPS support and payment to be available for any of our foster carers, not the HIPS foster carers, the Therapeutics Support Service. The old model, if you recall, last year that was only available to HIPS carers, whereas last year we took the decision to open that up to all foster carers. So that support would be available to foster carers if they took part in this approach, as would be the enhanced payment. So we've already put some steps in place that should aid that, rather than waiting until the budget is set, if you see what I mean, and then putting the action in place, because fundamentally some of this stuff is right for children. I do want to make that point that where possible and children can be supported out of residential, and that's right for them, we should be doing that. And so we've put some actions in place for that. Liz, any points you would wish to make around the foster care and foster care recruitment to help members on that part? And then we can maybe come back to the supported accommodation.
Yeah, I think I'd just echo Chris. Councillor Gandhi, you asked how have we decided, or how have we sorry, my screen's flickering, do apologise. How have we come to the conclusion about the young people who should step down? Is it on cost, or it's on the fact that they have a plan to be fostered, but they aren't fostered at the moment because we have no foster placement to put them in, hence they are in a residential unit. So that's how we have identified those children who should be stepped down to live in a family home rather than a residential unit. When we've been working on our approach to fostering, we have had considerable consultation with Devon, which is one of our statistical neighbours, and it's taken a similar approach. The size of their contract is slightly smaller. They were looking, I think, to recruit 20 foster carers a year, which they have done. And they had a recent press release which explained that over a 2-year period they had approved 40 foster carers. So it was 67 individual foster carers and 60 new placements. We wonder whether it really is the case that there doesn't seem to be enough suitable people in Herefordshire that would be interested in becoming foster carers. Because Richard Watson's done some research into this, and it would appear that over the past 5 years, over 20 independent fostering agencies have provided foster carers within Herefordshire. So there does seem to be the resource there. It's about us attracting that resource rather than independent fostering agencies. And yes, some foster carers are have particular issues which they've been required to shield, etc. But with the rollout of the vaccine, and we are wanting, if at all possible, to be able to prioritise foster carers for that vaccine, that should go some way to removing some of those barriers to foster carers being able to foster to their capacity in the near future. Thank you.
Before I call Philip, I'll just come back on that. Two things. In 2019-20, which is prior to COVID, we had a significant number of foster carers who left the service then. And Jill will say that some of them, they just become older. And she has actually said in previous meetings that a significant number of our foster carers are of an older age. And we are looking to recruit younger foster carers. And obviously, you know, across the country, there will be foster carers through natural wastage who will either retire from being foster carers, or they may actually adopt a child, or they decide to have a change of lifestyle. So I think there's always going to be a number that will step down. And this figure, therefore, if this figure means 30 new foster carers, then we've got to add on to that the numbers that we're going to lose through and then the normal situation. So I'm not saying that it's because of COVID. I think, and I'm not saying that going forward, I don't think, you know, I think that you probably will achieve this, but I am surprised, and perhaps I don't understand why we would put a financial incentive in 3 weeks ago. And I'm not saying that that will make any difference at all. We don't know whether it will, because I'm sure people do not go into foster caring for what they can make financially. They do it because it's a vocation they want to do. And obviously they need to be financially supported, but that is not the carrot that's dangled in order to get someone to become a foster carer. So I'm not convinced that because we're going to increase the allowances and offer other incentives, we may encourage some foster carers who are working with independent agencies to come and work for us. But I don't think that will necessarily recruit new foster carers, because to become a foster carer is a vocation. I would have been more easier with this if I'd have seen a smaller figure, say 10 for the first year, rising to say 20 in the second year, and then on to 30. But to go from where we are with an absolute statement from Jill Cox only at our last meeting that it was extremely difficult to recruit foster carers. And you've said that, you know, Chris has said nationally it's a problem. I think there's a shortage of about 8,500 or something across the country. To go straight in at 30 in the first year and 30 in the second year, I just do not think that is in any way realistic. And I don't see how you can set a budget where you know almost certainly that it's not achievable. And I understand why we're doing this, but I just don't think that it's achievable or realistic. And it'll probably go through to full council, and I will argue the same points again then. But I expect it will go through. But I just am somewhat concerned that we are plucking figures out of the air in this coming financial year for children's, which I can understand it's in order so we don't have to make any cuts, that we try to make savings, but these savings have to stand up, and I don't think these do. Right, Philip. Oh, do you want to answer the next question? Sorry, Chris.
Okay, yes, okay. Right, well, supported accommodation, I think Mr. Prattley and Councillor Jones in particular, I think. Mr. Prattley, I haven't got to hand some of the information, and I'll send that to you. I can't remember, forgive me if you were at the scrutiny meeting, but when Children and Young People looked at the proposals for Widemarsh Street, that did include you know, the approach around commissioning, and so there's some information in there that I'll get to you that may assist. The purchase was capital, Councillor Jones. If you recall, the council bought the building, but then there's a revenue cost for the support that goes into that, and the revenue costs for the support come through from the children's budget, and that's all wrapped up in the overall placements costs, Councillor Jones. So where you see that, you know, that significant figure of spend within the Children and Families Directorate, and obviously with the council, that significant spend is on individual children and young people, their placements and the costs of support with them. So there's subdivisions within that, but it is broken down within that. And once again, what we've looked at is groups of young people, some of whom currently and previously were being using supported accommodation, independent supported accommodation, including out of county in Herefordshire. And in Widemarsh Street now, we do have some children that have moved from that provision into that accommodation, which is great because they want to be in Hereford and in Herefordshire. It enables us to support them more easily because they're local, you know, local to our staff, and also so long as we don't replace them in the independent provision with new care leavers, if you see what I mean, in independent provision, then actually that releases a sum of money because we're using our own provision in Herefordshire. And the Bath Street accommodation is due to come on this year, and that will be available for some young people who are care experienced as well. So again, it is very much on an individual child and young person basis, but it is about supporting more young people locally, and that move towards adulthood and independence, which is part of that thing for care experienced young people, but to do that locally within the provision that the council's bought or is commissioning. And one of the activities we've got this year is to evaluate Widemarsh and see whether it would make sense to have a further property along that model. But it's early days because it was opened during the latter part of this year of 2020, wasn't it? You know, it was opened, I think July. It was slightly delayed because of the building work and COVID, but it's a great thing for Herefordshire, I think. So hopefully that's answered those questions. I think the final area was around mental health, Chair, if that's okay in terms of the, there is actually some initiatives and some work going on about supporting young people and their emotional well-being and mental health in schools, and we are part of a national initiative where there's some further support that's being made available and then being made available across the secondary sector. And my colleague Kerry Morgan might be able to say a bit more about that. We do know, don't we, that for emotional well-being, mental health issues, that is a huge area for us as a country, you know, as well as us locally. And you know, there's a range of activities around supporting emotional well-being and mental health. The Couth initiative, more locally, if you recall, that was started last year, the online support that's being made available is something relatively new for us in Herefordshire. But within the pandemic, I think it's good that that's being made available and being promoted and continues to be promoted amongst young people. I suppose at the acute side of things, if I use that phrase, we have had experience of some children going into tier 4 mental health provision, and one of our challenges is what happens then when they come out. How are they best supported? That sometimes is through residential provision, and that is another area that we're looking to work on with our clinical commissioning colleagues as part of the Hereford and Worcestershire CCG operating plan. They have some activities to strengthen the approach for mental health for children. So they are aware of that from a commissioning point of view, but that's something that we need to work on, Councillor Hay, with them. There isn't specifics right on there at the moment. Okay. And sorry, my screen's just disappeared, so I don't know whether I'm with you or not. I've got a Hoople application, so apologies. Yeah.
Councillor Howells. Oh,
Yeah,
Kerry. Sorry, Kerry, did you want to comment on that?
Only, thank you, councillors. Thank you, Chair. Only to add a little bit to Chris's detail there. I just want to be clear which group of children we're talking about. If it's the whole school population and the mental health pressures caused by lockdown 1 and then 2, we're aware of that. There are a couple of DFE initiatives around catch-up support and so on. One of them's run into heavy weather, so it's slowed up and is behind schedule, which I suppose is predictable. But actually, I'm interested in what we can do to support some smaller subgroups immediately. School leavers and children in the care of the county, for example, much smaller, more manageable numbers. We did do 2 surveys, if you remember. One was in June or July. That was a local one conducted with Worcestershire, just Hereford and Worcestershire, and then there was a national one which was released. It's still very early in this current lockdown, but I imagine those pressures are just as evident now as they were before. If it's the big whole school population, we probably have to rely on some of the DFE funding that they promised, I think, which is yet to come. But just to remind people, it was a slightly mixed picture. There were actually some youngsters who were more comfortable with the online offer than the hurly-burly of daily school life. But I don't want to mislead. They were a minority. Most youngsters suffered through the lack of social contact from being in schools. So at the moment, we're just lobbying the DFE for when will the catch-up programme funding be released and what will the requirements be around that.
Chair, would it be okay if I request we have an update on that in future meeting, because I think
sure.
I'm conscious of the fact that it always is something that's coming online or coming on stream, and it needs to be done now, because it really is something that's quite urgent that we get ahead of the curve with the potential support that young people might need.
Yeah, thank you, councillors.
Councillor Howells.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a few points and 2 questions. I take Sam's point about the comparison of savings against the overall figure. That would be useful. But I also recognise that obviously a great deal of thinking has gone into producing this report. I think it could be a bit more detailed in those sort of areas. But I do appreciate the fact a lot of work has gone into substantiate how we can still maintain quality and level of care despite making savings. And also, these figures are very difficult to arrive at. Clearly, a great deal of heart searching has gone in to find savings in this budget in relation to the rest of the budget. And, I don't think we can really gainsay it, really, because like you, I think it will probably go through, because we can't rehearse all the detail here because we're not looking at the overall budget. However, I do share your concern. I think it remains to be seen whether these savings generally are sustainable. This is probably going to be the most challenging part of the budget. We've still got some difficult months ahead yet. I don't know if ACRE's do any better, because they've had to sort of pretty well put a finger in the air and say, this is what we hope to maintain. But I have to say, I'd be very surprised if at the end of it, we actually can achieve these savings. I think they're going to be more precious than probably we've realised. And I've got 2 questions. I've had quite satisfactory explanations of most of the items, but I don't understand what full cost recovery of traded services means. It's only 20k, so obviously not significant, but I would like to know what that means. More importantly, the manage inflation and secure contract efficiencies. That's about 20% of the proposed savings. This is the most nebulous part overall of the savings. And I would just like a bit more detail about just how you arrived at that figure and where you think those savings can genuinely be made and what's meant by managing inflation. Thank you.
Chris, would you like to?
Forgive me, sorry, yes, yeah, certainly. In terms of traded services, we have a number that we trade with schools, and it's in Kerry Morgan's area, but we're looking to where we can apply the full cost recovery approach. As you say, Councillor Howes, it is a small figure, but that's part of it. In terms of managing contract and inflation, that is across all our contracts, including our individual placements budgets. And if I give an example, we're part of a regional approach for some of these things, Councillor, and we're part of a regional framework. The regional framework offers 0.5 of inflation. and we have some providers who've said they want 4.5% in terms of inflation. So that's an example of where we would be looking to manage that and achieve savings as part of this overall approach. But it also indicates some of the pressures around, and it is a market that we operate in. We do trade, if that's the right phrase, with private providers. So it's across all of the contracts in children and young people's, and particularly around individual contracts with agencies as well. Does that clarify the two things that you were asking for?
The first one, yeah, certainly. The second, I realise it's a difficult figure to arrive at, so I can understand some of the ways in which you can put a figure in there. Clearly not all of it. There might be some other explanations, but thank you for that anyway. I do have a better understanding at least.
Councillor Toynbee.
Yes, thank you very much. I was going to ask exactly the same question as Councillor Howells. That's what jumped out at me about the full cost recovery of traded services and securing contract efficiency. And I think as far as the general public is concerned, saying things like we're part of a regional framework doesn't, that really still doesn't really mean much to people. And it would be nice to have that spelt out in plain English that people can understand.
If I may, Councillor, just to mention on that, sorry, because I didn't mean to be opaque. It means that the region, so the West Midlands region, of which there are, I think, 14 authority areas, acts as one. So we enter into negotiations with some providers as, in essence, setting a bar, but across that whole region. So that provides much more weight to that approach than if Herefordshire tried to do it alone and then Worcestershire agreed a different figure. And so that's what that means, Councillor. I hope that clarifies that.
Yes, no, thank you. I understand that it's a useful process to give us more sort of leverage in negotiation. I think it would be nice to have it just spelt out a little bit more for people who aren't aware of the background. Thank you. And yeah, thank you also to all the officers who've been putting this together. And all the hard work it is, which I really appreciate. And in my opinion, it's a lot harder than it should be because of, should we say, erratic behaviour and short-term thinking from central government, and a worrying context of child poverty and families in crisis. So I've just got two questions on top of the one that Councillor Howells asked, and one is about control. I know that a lot of our budget and expenditure, especially in this area, is beyond our control because it's demand-led. It involves our statutory duties, and we work with lots of different partners. So I'm just sort of interested in how that feels, how you manage that. I'm sure it's difficult to quantify, but it's obvious it must be a very key part of how we budget. And another one, which may be a stupid question, is I'm just wondering what the chances are of any more funding appearing this year. Kerry, you mentioned the DFE catch-up funding. Is there anything else that might be on stream, either DFE or more generally? And if there is it likely to go into children and young people?
Just by way of
sorry, Andrew. I suppose we could all talk. Maybe be able to chip in a bit on that. But yeah, Andrew, do you want to?
Just to the question about is there going to be any more funding? The honest answer is we don't know. We provide government, MHCLG is the department that's coordinating this. We provide them with very regular updates of the financial impact of dealing with the COVID situation. I think we're on iteration 8 or 9 of that. It's happening very significantly. At the moment, we are not aware of any additional funding being made available, but I think the last few months have pointed to that government is having to move very quickly in these areas. So I wouldn't want to rule out there won't be any additional money, but at the moment, as of today, we're not have been cited on any, but I'm very conscious a number of groups are making the financial position for children and families very clear with government. And we're part of that through the officer networks. So it's a question of watch this space, but nothing that we're aware of at the moment.
When you say that you're aware of that through officer groups, do you mean, officers can't lobby, presumably. So
No, we certainly don't lobby, and I wasn't trying to give that impression. But as officers, we will point out to the civil servants in MHCLG and DFE and all the government departments the reality of the financial position for local government. So the returns I just mentioned, they're called the Delta returns. We do spell out very clearly the financial challenges that this council faces because of dealing with the COVID position. And if you look at the budget monitoring reports that go through to Cabinet, now we are spending 16 million pounds more than we expected to deal with COVID issues. Now we've received a fair amount of funding from government to date, but clearly not all of that is fully funded from government.
thank you very much.
Kath.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to come back very quickly, just to do with the fostering issue, because it occurred to me, I wasn't sure what part adoption plays in the overall picture in terms of how many children will go on to be adopted if they are fostered, and whether that's something obviously that can be considered, that obviously a certain amount of funding goes towards fostering, and whether there can be earlier intervention in terms of looking to have a child adopted. Really just trying to get an understanding of how those two things tally, the fostering, the adoption, and whether there's any scope for a child to go down the adoption route earlier as opposed to being fostered.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chair. If I ask Liz to respond to that, and include, Liz, if you made the kind of foster to adopt initiative, if you wouldn't mind saying something about that. And the figure of 30 is it needs to cover our attrition rate as well. So I think that was the point, just to clarify that. But Liz, do you mind saying about adoption in response to Councillor Hay? Thank you.
Whether a child has a plan for long-term fostering or adoption is actually determined via the court process. So that isn't something that children's social care alone determine. Very few general foster carers, and that's the foster carers we wish to recruit. Very few adopt. Some are exiting the fostering because they are applying for special guardianship orders, which we are assessing and are wanting to happen where it can, because that's the right thing for the child. We're in the ACE Regional Adoption Agency, and they actually recruit people who are prepared to foster to adopt. And so they will be people who have been approved as adopters, but they will take a child as a foster carer in the hope that the final plan will be one of adoption, and then they will continue to care for that child and then adopt the child. But they do that in the recognition that the final court-ordered care plan may not be adoption. It may be to return the child to the birth family, and therefore they may not have long-term care of that child. So foster to adopt is a very different service, and different people are recruited for that than people who are recruited to do general fostering. If I could just add, one of the comments earlier about earlier intervention to reduce the looked after population that we have. Yes, earlier intervention is right, but the other thing that does reduce our looked after population is earlier identification of kinship care and a robust foster to adopt programme, which we do now have through our membership of the ACE Regional Adoption Agency.
Okay, Kath? Yeah. Sam?
Thank you, Chair. Just linked to my earlier question, I am interested in the overall picture. So effectively the £40 million that's spent on the Directorate, then less the savings. Is it possible to get a sense of what proportion of that 40 million is spent on internal services, external contracts, purchasing of childcare places? That was the overall context that I felt I couldn't quite grasp from the report. But does anybody have those numbers broadly off the top of their head?
Chris? Andrew?
Yeah. If you bear with me 1 second, is that all right? Well, I'll just. But if you carry on, I'll come back, Chair. Is that okay? Because I'll just bring up the budget report we have from.
I haven't got anybody else on the list at the moment, so I'll ask just one or make another comment really, not to do with fostering. I welcome the money that's being allocated to enable some of our most vulnerable children to access learning in a mainstream environment from our capital programme. And I'd be interested to know whether we have a real knowledge of how much Section 106 monies is available for education from various building schemes that are taking place across the county. I certainly know from previous experience elsewhere that it is really difficult to get a handle on what Section 106 money was identified for which educational project or where it was supposed to go, and quite often it just gets lost in the quagmire of just Section 106 money, never to be seen again. Liz?
Yeah, well, we're in the final stage of getting Section 106 money actually placed on the website for everybody to see.
Right.
So hopefully that information will be much more accessible to the public.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. It's very helpful.
If I may, Chair, just about the budget, is that okay? Just because I've just called up the November full year forecast. So, I mean, we can make this available for scrutiny members. I think, Andrew. I mean, it's part of our budget reporting, isn't it, on a monthly basis? But our net budget for education and commissioning is about 5.5 million. That includes early help and early years. It's a gross of 92, but that's because 84 million is dedicated schools grant. Yeah, so, and Mr. Prattley will understand that with his role with the Diocese of Education as well. Safeguarding and family support. There's a net budget this year of 27 million, of which about 20 million pounds really is around looked after children, care leavers placements. And there's a variance on that at the moment, forecast variance of 4.8 million. And that's the area that we've largely concentrated on, you know, in terms of changing the pattern of how we're supporting children, young people, and therefore changing the pattern of spend. We have some services around safeguarding and review, you know, quality assurance, about 900,000 of that, and there are some other headings as well, but the overall budget, gross budget for children and families is 125 million, of which there's a net budget this year of 34 million, but a forecast of 38. And that's in part how we've set the budget and how we've distributed money as a council as well. And Andrew, I'm sure, will be able to talk about that. And that's where some of the readjustment is being proposed in next year's budget alongside that. And you'll see in the papers, there's talk about things like council tax and the money for social care as well, you know, and I think councillors have talked about COVID-19 money. So there are different dynamics within this, Mr. Prattley, in terms of funding sources coming in one-off Monday. But what's being set out in the papers is the fundamental approach for the children and families part of the overall council budget. Andrew, do you want to say anything more on that in terms of?
Thank you. Yes, and I think that I think that the lesson I think I'm taking away from this, that we need to improve how we're reporting that information for this committee, because I think it's key to and how it gets reported to Cabinet. So certainly we have that raw data, and it is we need to just convert that into something that actually is in the public domain. So I'm very happy to take that away as an action, and we'll do that. And I think probably what you may want to do as a committee, once we have a few cycles of that, is spend a little bit of time seeing whether that's meeting your needs. If it's not, then we'll very happy to talk to you about how we change it so it is meeting your needs. So I'm very happy to do that.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things that we talked about in our pre-meeting was when I looked at the papers for adult scrutiny, because obviously the adult social care ring fence 3% is obviously relevant to adult social care. There is a significant amount of information in there about the income from council tax and the fact that that has dropped significantly as a result of COVID, and not necessarily only that, but a lot of cases COVID, because people are no longer in employment, and I suspect business rates as well, because a lot of companies will no longer be able to perhaps pay their business rates. Now, none of that is in our report at all. So we don't have, so in the adults report, I understand why it's in there to identify the reason that, well, there's all sorts of things about what they're wanting to do with some of the adult social care grant, ring fence grant. But I do think it would have been really helpful if we'd had the picture of the full savings that we need to make across the authority, because that isn't in this document, and the fact of how we've split this money up, and the fact that there is this shortfall in collection of council tax, which has come about as a result of COVID in the main, because that would have helped us, I think. So there is, I think these are probably the thinnest, and sometimes that's good, but this is the thinnest sort of papers we've had for budget setting, I think, that since I've been on Herefordshire Council. Now, I don't expect to have huge, Liz, you're going to say.
Yeah, I mean, we've provided specifically the information relating to children's, but published alongside it is the information for general scrutiny at the end of the week, which the recommendations from this committee feed into, which has got rather more detail in it that's in the public domain and published alongside this. So
yeah,
apologies if it would have been more helpful for you to have had it in your pack, but as we understood it, this was a very clear look at the children's scrutiny committee's area of responsibility, and it's Friday where that is projected into context with respect to the entire.
Yeah. And I understand that, and I understand why you've done that. And for some members, they will probably have looked at general scrutiny, but some members won't. And certainly our co-opted members almost certainly will not have done. And some of our members, when they looked through the documents here for today, probably will have done so before the ones for general scrutiny were published. So it's not a criticism. I don't think we would want all the information that is necessarily available in the general scrutiny papers. I just think a little bit more information, as there is in the adults, would have been helpful, so that we understood what the total savings are required for the authority, and how we've got this issue with regards to receiving the council tax collection levels at the rate we have done in the previous years.
Okay, I mean, well, we're as Andrew said, very happy to work with you to give the information that you want without making you feel overloaded.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Any more questions? Can I just raise one more point, which is we talked about it earlier, really, which is the pressure on our special educational needs schools. And I believe that there is something that the Directorate is looking at going forward with regards to that. And I welcome that. And I think one of the issues is really, from talking to some of our co-opted committee members, Herefordshire is seen as a county that offers extremely good provision for children with special educational needs, and we should be really proud of that. But of course, with that comes the challenges of trying to accommodate those children. And so there are some families that have chosen to move to Herefordshire because of what they believe to be really good special educational needs education, but that puts a huge challenge on us as a directorate and an authority in providing places for those children. And so I welcome the fact that I think, you know, there is discussions going on as to how we deal with this in the future to make it more cost effective for the local authority. Yeah. Kerry? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right,
Yes,
Councillor Gandy. Yeah, sorry, we are. Yeah, that's a piece of work we are undertaking, and yeah, it's something that, from a funding point of view, does have implications for the dedicated school grant. And you'll know that you know, historically around in this area, Herefordshire, as you say, Chair, has done well. We were, I think, at one stage one of two local authority areas who weren't predicting an overspend with our high needs approach, and that's, you know, been several years' work. And we also had the Empower study, didn't we, saying about we were, you know, second in the country for value for money for special educational needs, you know, which was a good reflection of what people have worked on locally. But yeah, we are looking at the range of provision, special school capacity and support, but also what more could be done in mainstream as well. Yeah, and that's not directly tied into this, but you're right, Chair, it's a piece of really important work for this year going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else, any other questions? No. Matt, have you got some recommendations that have come out of this before I call on the Cabinet Member for Finance and the leader and also the portfolio holder?
I have. Do you want me to display them on screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, so if you'd like me to read them aloud, that the committee recognises improvements in the performance of the service and welcomes the additional funding to the base budget. The committee queries the feasibility of the stretch target for the recruitment of foster carers in the 2021-22 and 2022-23 financial years and recommends that the target in the next 2 years is reconsidered. That the committee requests an update to a future meeting of the committee on funding available from government to address the mental health impacts of the pandemic on young people. And then the committee expresses concern that a lack of detail regarding the budget for children and families and the overall council is contained in the report to enable consideration of the context in which savings are proposed.
I'm not sure whether the last one is a little bit too strong, because I think, to be fair, I mean, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I mean, I think, to be fair, officers, and I'm sure Councillor Harvey, have worked hard to sort of produce a document which is readable and not too lengthy. But I think we just need a bit more. So I don't know how to word it for it to be a little bit less harsh. Can we just put something like request that we have a little more detail regarding in future years or something like that?
Okay. Yep.
Because I think that's a little bit harsh.
Request more context or more information in
Yes.
future years. Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
That would be relevant to the yeah, that'll do.
Okay.
And also with regards to the second bullet point, to make it clear, queries the stretch target for the recruitment of foster care in 2022 financial year and recommends that the target in those 2 years is reconsidered, because otherwise it looks as if we might be looking at 23, 24, 24, 25. You put burger then, didn't you?
Okay.
Yeah. And then on number 2, in the recommends that the target in those 2 years is
Okay, I've updated that the target in those next 2 years is reconsidered.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we have any more? Do the members have any more recommendations they would like to put to be considered? I can't see anybody. That's the trouble. No. Oh, Kate. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
By that, sorry. Chair, sorry, I just wanted to ask clarification about the final bullet point. If you wanted, are you saying the overall budget of the children and families, or are you asking for the overall budget of the council?
Oh no, I don't think we want the overall budget of the council. It's children's services. Liz?
I was just wondering, Chair, if it would be at all helpful, rather than to try and craft something that met next year's need, if instead we planned into the process that we consulted with the chairs of the scrutiny committees in terms of the level of detail that your committees provided with ahead of publishing the papers.
That'd be fun.
That we can kind of agree it beforehand and make sure that you're happy with it and deal with it that way next year.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah. So can we word it like that, Matt? That fine, Diana? Yeah. Yeah. And I just think we will put a final recommendation, which is not not an actionable recommendation, but I think it's a recognition. Can we put in there a recognition of all the work that has been done by both the Children's Directorate, the portfolio holder for finance, and others in putting this budget together for us? Because I know how difficult it is, and particularly this year.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So can you put those recommendations back up, Matt, and then we can ask the committee whether they're happy with them.
Okay, just bear with me a second. Right. Okay, so I've amended the one about the detail. In future years, scrutiny committee chairpersons are consulted over the detail required in the reports to the committee, and that the committee acknowledges the work that has been undertaken in compiling the budget for 21-22.
Yeah, that's fine. Is everybody, can I just ask if any more recommendations, or anybody unhappy with those recommendations? No. So if I'd now like then to call upon, first of all, the leader of the council, if you'd like to comment on the debate and the recommendations that we have. Thank you.
Well, I think the committee is quite right to focus on the potential savings. There is a degree of science behind it, some justification by the officers, and we need to encourage them to deliver those savings, because if the savings aren't delivered in this particular area, then they have to come from somewhere else in the council. From an income perspective, we're proposing to push council tax as much as we can. That's not going to be popular, although I think in the consultation 45% of people didn't think it was unreasonable. Asking people to poke themselves in the eye, it's a bit like that. But I think we have we're fortunate to have a community that's willing to support these particular needs. So we can't increase the income. So if we don't produce these savings in this area, we have to find them somewhere else. So it's not an easy hit. It's one of those games where you hit the rabbit on the rat's coming out, and then you have to find another hole. It's a bit like that. And as well, Carol, from you've been involved in this for long enough. There were some questions about lobbying by officers. I think there's the organisation called the County Council Network, which is hugely helpful in producing research, and some of that's mentioned in here. We rely upon the officers to provide the information to that organisation to come up with sort of figures which indicate sort of where we are in the pecking order. There's a reference to 9 out of 10 councils being under pressure, so we know we're not unusual in all of this. And really, I'd just like to acknowledge all the work that's being done. We have seen some improvements in the looked after children area, children with care experience, we should say. So that's good. We do wait and see what happens as a result of COVID. No one really knows. And again, comments have been made about whether we've got enough spare within the budget to cope with that kind of thing, and we just don't know. I'm grateful for Andrew Lovegrove and his work on this, testing out whether these savings can be achieved and using his own judgment in that. So thank you to all the officers for what they're doing and what we're doing for the community in Herefordshire.
Thank you. And now I'd like to call upon the Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd really like to thank all the members of the committee for the thought and the attention that you've given to these budget papers. It really is appreciated, and also obviously to officers for all of the hard work put into thinking through all of this. As you've highlighted, there's more than £6.5 million worth of additional pressures that we are recognising are coming onto the looked after children line of our budget. And we're hoping that in the way that we're implementing transformational change throughout and across the directorate, that change programme will assist us in delivering some sort of £2.25 million worth of savings that we're recognising in the way that we're presenting the budget here. So it is a net uplift in the budget provision against the demands of looked after children of over £4 million. So it's not additional funding in the sense that, but it's recognising that those additional pressures exist, and it's the responsible thing to do to acknowledge those in the way that we've constructed the budget. So we're hoping that the transformational change programme will deliver better outcomes for our young people, alongside providing efficiencies and improvements in the way that services are delivered. But we're also acknowledging there are significant and sustained pressures that are being encountered in this directorate over and above the normal pressures that are there, that are very much related to COVID and the circumstances that families find themselves in as a consequence of these multiple lockdowns. So we're trying very hard to balance finding the savings where we can, recognising them in the way the budget's been put together, but also recognising our statutory responsibilities for continuing to provide sufficient budget to enable us to deliver children's services for the children of our county.
Thank you. Councillor Norman, as portfolio holder, would you like to say a few words?
I would. Thank you, Councillor Gandhi, and first of all echo the appreciation that's been expressed, all the work involved by Councillor Harvey and finance officers, and of course officers within the directorate as well. A huge amount of work in all of this, so very grateful for all of that. It's good to hear from Councillor Harvey recognition of the ongoing work, the improvements are being made, transitional programme, lots to do, long way to go, but we're moving in the right direction, and it's good to hear a recognition of that as well. Thank you to the committee for a range of questions and comments which help us to get the picture clearer, to give us an opportunity to respond to particular detail, and draws out certain aspects of what we're doing and why and how. So thank you very much for all of that. I think Councillor Toynbee's setting the context was very helpful. We have a background to all of this that we need to remember, not least, as I think she put it, the erratic messages coming out from government in terms of what we should be doing, what finance might be available and so on, which is incredibly difficult, as I'm sure we all appreciate. Erratic is a polite word for it, actually, but it is very difficult for everyone to work within that context. But she also referred to the really appalling situation we're facing: increasing poverty, loss of jobs, incomes reduced, all those things which put enormous pressure on families and children and everyone who's trying to help and support them, including schools. This is not likely to change in the very short term. We need to remember that this is where we are. Reference is made to this is demand-led. We have statutory duties we can't avoid. And as Andrew has said, further funding, we just don't know. You know, we hope we'll get the funding we expect, but there is an awful lot more that we need, and we simply don't know where that might be coming from. So it is a difficult circumstance. We all know that we find ourselves in, makes what we're doing, all of us within the directorate and in as far as finance is concerned, you know, even more important than it would be otherwise. So I'm grateful to everyone who's contributed. Thank you very much. And I think we all want to achieve the very best we can for our children and young people. And I appreciate the work that goes into all of this. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've looked at the recommendations. I'd like to propose them. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Howells. Okay, so we'll now we'll need to go to the vote. So I will now ask committee members to vote on the recommendations by an electronic vote. As this report does not concern an educational matter, the co-optee on the committee are not entitled to vote and will be moved into the breakout room. Please can non-voting attendees be moved to the breakout room now and the number of voting members be confirmed.
Okay, Chair, the voting number is going to be 6.
Thank you.
And you should now be able to cast your vote. Okay, all votes are in. That's unanimously accepted.
Thank you. If we'd like to please bring back to the room the non-attending members at the meeting. Thank you. Okay, is that everybody back? Yes. We move them. Those recommendations were unanimously agreed. Move on to item 8, which is the work programme review. That has been circulated to you. You are asked to review the work programme as attached. As you know, we have a meeting on an extra meeting on the 19th of January, which will be to look at the issues around the Hope Children's Centre. And then we have a meeting in March, which is the details of the content of that meeting are in the work programme. We've obviously not gone any further than that, other than to state some items which we haven't allocated yet, because we will have the AGM in May, and we at this moment in time do not know what the arrangements will be for scrutiny, etc. Going forward beyond the end of this municipal year. There is a draft scoping document attached with the work programme on paediatric therapies for a task and finish group. At this moment in time, because it involves some of our partner organisations, the CCG and Wye Valley Trust, we do not know when this task and finish group would be able to meet. So we will not today, other than agree the terms of reference and the scope of the task and finish, we will not determine either the chair or obviously the membership, but we will determine the number of people that we think should be actually committee members on that task and finish group. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the programme of work, and I'm thinking particular of the March meeting on the 23rd. One of the items is around school examination performance, colleagues, and you realise that last summer examination results were awarded. They weren't taken, and as it's worded, that item is to consider available data concerning school performance 2020 and make recommendations to Cabinet on the effectiveness of the school improvement framework and how the strategy could be enhanced. It may be worth actually considering the announcement for this summer that scrutiny might want to consider what the implications are for children around that, rather than perhaps reflecting on the awarded results. Do you see what I mean? Because we're into different territory, and we are again for this year, and it might be more useful for you to scrutinise what's taking place and what's going to be the process, rather than what happened in 2020. So I don't know, Chair, I know we haven't discussed this beforehand, but I just wondered whether that'd be helpful.
Yes, it probably would, Chris, actually. I think it would also be helpful because obviously there is the back. Is Kerry still with us? Yeah. Oh, yeah. There is the background from last year regarding teacher assessment, and then obviously it was externally moderated. But this time round, it's going to be teacher assessment, and I'm assuming, and I don't quite know whether it's going to be moderated at all or not, and I don't know whether we do know yet at all. But I think it would be. We don't know. I think it would be useful to actually look at what went wrong last time round, as well as so that we have some understanding of what might go wrong this time round.
Do you mind just elaborating a little bit, Chair? Do you mean the national kind of timing and announcement, or do you mean?
No, I mean the actual teacher assessments, which were then moderated, which then had to be changed, didn't they? Because there was a view that schools from more deprived areas.
Oh, you mean the algorithm?
Yes,
in essence, children vulnerable to poor outcomes actually disproportionately didn't do as well as they could have done.
Because it was based on previous years. Those schools.
Yeah, I think, Chair, from what I'm understanding, and this is only through the kind of national thing, is that they're not looking to repeat that, but we could provide more details on what is being proposed for March of that. Kerry?
Kerry?
Yeah, thank you, councillors. Just a suggestion, Chair, it might be worth, I think Chris is right, we don't quite know what they're planning for next summer, other than we know it's teacher assessment, likely to not involve an algorithm, likely to not be moderated, but we don't know for sure yet. It might be worth looking at some of the things the schools have done that have worked well or less well during the pandemic. So, for example, the online offer, which the schools did in lockdown 1 versus the quality of it in lockdown 2, that kind of performance indicator. I know it's soft in terms of what we're telling you we think we're finding in schools now, but I think that might be helpful for councillors to hear. I'm not, and it might be, as Chris says, an opportunity to just have an update on what the national system's looking like next summer, particularly for certain year groups. I think, like youngsters who missed out on GCSEs last year and are now going to miss out on their first year of a 2-year course next year. And we could put some useful information together, but it won't be exam results. It'll only be the system around exam results. I think.
I understand that.
Yeah.
And we could look at, I'm just thinking out loud now, we could look at whether we might ask one or two young people who've been through the experience what their experience was, which would be helpful.
Be quite sobering, I fear.
But I think we need to know. I mean, I think there's a view of what we think about it, and there's a view of what the young people who are actually going through it think about it.
Yeah.
But I can discuss that with Matt and see whether that's possible, and possibly some of the teachers themselves. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Chris. That's very helpful. Okay, so if we go back then to the scoping document for the therapies, Does any? I mean, I would personally. Sorry, Diana.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's okay. I just wanted to say that I agree with Chris and Kerry. It would be really good to have an update as things are moving so fast on results, exams, assessments, and what the repercussions of it all are. So we might not need to set in stone now what we want to know then, because everything's changing so fast. So thank you.
Yeah.
And yes, on the scoping document, I just wanted to thank Matt for putting it together. It's very useful. I agree with you, Chair, that this probably isn't the moment to ask NHS partners to help us with a piece of work, and that it's really important that we take the time to get this right with really specific objectives, so that at the end of the process we come out with something more than just sort of nice platitudes about how we all have to get out of our silos and do joined up working and blah blah, the usual kind of stuff. So I agree it would be really good to put this back on into a time when we can really give it the energy and importance that it deserves. And in the meantime, if we all as committee members have a good look at the document that Matt's drawn up and ready to feed into how we'd like to maybe sharpen up the objectives a bit.
Matt, do we? Matt?
I think that's fine. If you wish to defer consideration of the scoping document and convening the actual task and finish group until I've gone away and had a conversation with the Wye Valley Trust and the CCG about when they may be able to resource or provide resource for people to work with us on the inquiry.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, is everyone agreeing with that? Right, okay. Move on then. So there's no recommendations. So there's the tracker. The tracker is the recommendations that we have made in the past, either to the cabinet or to outside partners. In talking to Matt, my view is that we need to clean this up a bit. Some of these items have been resolved and can in fact be removed from the tracker. Some of them haven't, and there needs to be a greater explanation of where we are with them. And some of them we've made no progress at all. And I think one of the things that we also perhaps need to do, possibly going forward, but obviously I've not known what going forward is going to look like. We need to be clear that where a recommendation has been accepted, whether it be by cabinet or by a partner and approved, what has then happened with it? What difference has it made? How has it been implemented? Because at the moment we get a response back from cabinet which says agreed, but then that's it really, and we should be going back and checking. It's been agreed. How has it changed? How we do things? And how do we demonstrate that? And Andy's putting his thumb up. So I think that's something we need to do. So I think in the short term, myself and Diana will chat with Matt and we'll clean the document up. We'll look at what is outstanding and hasn't been resolved at all yet. From either, I don't think there's anything outstanding from the cabinet that's not been resolved, but there are from outside partners. And we look at some of the things that have been agreed by cabinet and then check, how they've been implemented and what change, if anything, they've made to the way we do things. Because, you could say that cabinet agreeing to most of our recommendations is good, or you could say cabinet agreeing to most of our recommendations is not good, because actually all we're doing is agreeing with what we're putting forward recommendations which aren't exactly groundbreaking or thinking outside the box or controversial. And sometimes we should be actually doing that, because that's what scrutiny should be doing, rather than just doing something that is fairly placid and anybody, cabinet will just accept because it's not going to cause a problem anywhere. So I think that's the next stage there. That'll be a piece of work that we need to do. Do we need to vote on anything here, Matt, other than we vote on, yeah, we have to vote on, certainly on deferring the scoping document. And
Yes, I've got the recommendations for the work programme, so if you'd like me to display those.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I've just updated the recommendations. So we've agreed to change the school performance item at the March meeting, which is the last element of the first recommendation, and I've also updated the second recommendation to say that we defer approval to a later meeting date. And then in the last recommendation, I've put that the committee asked that outstanding issues are identified in the recommendation tracker and followed up.
So I will propose those recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Diana, thank you. Do we have any comments from cabinet member or officers? No? Okay. So I will ask committee members to vote on the recommendations by the electronic vote. So please can non-voting attendees be moved to the breakout room and the number of voting members be confirmed.
Okay, Chair, we're back to the 7 voting members on this item. And the poll should be in front of them now.
Okay.
And those have been unanimously accepted.
Good. Okay. That's fine. Can we now bring the non-voting members back to the meeting? Okay. We now move on to item 9, which was the date of the next meeting, which I've already referred to. Before we do that, I'd just like to make a comment about the fact that myself and Diana, along with chairs and vice chairs of all scrutiny committees, have taken part in the questionnaire regarding rethinking governance. We did this last week, I believe. And there was a series of questions which we have been asked, and we did it in conjunction with Matt and John Coleman to ensure that we got it as right as we can. At the end of the questionnaire, there was another section of the document which included good practice self-assessment questionnaire, which is a self-assessment of how we believe our committee is doing and whether it's making a difference and whether it's actually dealing with the subjects that it should be dealing and how it fits in with the corporate plan, etc., etc. We answered those questions to the best of our ability, but I thought it would be really helpful and useful to us if Matt circulates those questions to the members of the committee without our responses, and that you complete over the next 3 or 4 weeks, you complete those responses yourself to see whether your views on our performance as a committee are the same as our views. If they are, that's wonderful. If they're not, well, then we've obviously got a bit of a problem that we need to look at. But I do think it will be very useful to get feedback from members of the committee on their self-assessment of the work that we're doing. Okay, is everybody happy with that? Yes, yeah, that's fine. Okay then, so the date of the next meeting is the 19th of January. It's at 10 o'clock. And finally, before I formally close this meeting, can I check with Democratic Services that the live stream has been switched off and we are no longer broadcasting live or recording?